This is the story of how I almost spent £16,000 on worms. And if you're not subscribed, subscribe right now for Extreme Gardening, where we go to the extremes in gardening. Literally the other day, I got called the Mr. Beast of gardening. Thanks, Sean James Cameron. And so I'm like Mr. Beast, but yeah, there's some differences. Anyway, £16,000 on worms. Now in gardening, worms are absolutely incredible. They do amazing things to our soil. And the biggest thing we use them for is composting. Worm composting is using worms to recycle food scraps and other organic material into a valuable soil amendment called vermicompost, or worm compost. Worms eat food scraps which become compost as it passes through the worm's body. Compost exits the worm through its tail end. It's basically worm poo, but it is absolutely amazing for our plants, which is why I want to buy some worms to start composting so I can sprinkle it over some of the plants we're growing here on the channel and around the home. Now I already have a place to put the worms. I brought a worm, let's call it like a worm home, like a worm house, a wormery, that's the word I was looking for. And you can buy these for around 60 quid. Or have a look on Marketplace or something like that, you're bound to find one. Now I've had one of these for a few years, and in that time I've moved home, and now it finally sits at the end of my garden. And as I've moved home, whatever's inside that wormery has come with it. My good friend Richard gave me some worms from his wormery, and I'm really sorry, but I think they may have left us. I don't know if they moved out, or let's not think about it. There was one survivor when I looked in the wormery who was just hanging in there. You can do it. But I bet he couldn't believe that I was opening up the wormery. And my good friend Richard said he'll give me some more worms. He doesn't learn, does he? Well, I thought, no, I'm gonna buy some worms. So I went onto the Tinternet and had a little look, and there I found the £16,000 worms. And the title was The Worms That Cost $20,000 a kilo. Let's read on. I mean, he's thinking about it and he's like, yeah, this is good. This is good news. I did think worms that are worth £16,000 must be amazing. At a stall near the entrance of a grocery store in southern China, the shopper is greeted with a delicate arrangement of dried objects. Lean in a little closer and you'll see that there are inch-long dead caterpillars with stalks growing down their heads. These worms are gathered in Tibet and the Himalayas, and they're carefully used in Chinese traditional medicine and have something in them that's good for just about anything, from asthma to cancer. Okay, they're also, perhaps more importantly, the kind of thing that cures low social status in the processor, a trait shared in common with caviar and mink coats. Never have I heard worms be used in the same sentence as caviar and mink coats. And they estimate to sell for in excess of $20,000, £16,000 per kilo. That's at least 10 times the cost of black truffles. People steep them in water by the ones and twos and put them in medicinal soups. It's still a considerable investment, with a quality worm or two coming out at something like £8 to £12. I mean, just look at them. They're dried up and then used for medicine. Now you may be saying, hey, where are you going to buy these £16,000 worms? And thankfully for me and my bank balance, they're now considered endangered. Now, being extreme gardening, we go to the extremes. And as mentioned earlier, like Mr. Beast, we haven't got quite that budget. I mean, go and check out last week's Tomato to Space, which you can still be a part of. But I did still want to go and buy some worms. And you can do this online and you don't have to spend £16,000, but they do create gold. Some may say liquid gold. So I went back on the internet and had a little type. And what did I find? Yorkshire worms. Now this is not a sponsored video, this is not an affiliate, anything like that, but this is where I headed to get my worms. And I've used them before, a good few years ago, and they are great, and they come in the post. Imagine being a postman that has to deliver worms through your door. So I had a little look through their website, and found that tiger worms, tiger worms were the best worms for composting. And at £13 for 250 grams, a lot cheaper. Now, the tiger worm is very good at rapid processing of organic waste in nutrient-rich compost. And they have a huge appetite, which is handy because they're going to need it. And 2 days later, guess what come through the door? That's right, my worms were posted through the letterbox. In a package like this, it said, what's it say on it? Urgent. Living creatures handled with care. So the first thing to do was check to see how my worms were doing. They'd just travelled from Yorkshire. 151 miles, these worms. They must be going, what is going on here? Where are we? You're in Essex. So I opened up the box to see how my worms were looking, and they looked incredible. A lot of them weren't really moving. I mean, they had been in transit for 2 days and probably were quite cold. It was over January when we got these. And once I'd done a quick check on these absolute beauties, I headed down the end of the garden to go and put them in their new home. Now, like I said, my wormery hasn't been touched in about 2 years, and when I looked inside, there was one lone soldier carrying on composting, but the whole thing had filled up with water. It was really soggy and really not the right conditions for worms in there. It had got waterlogged. So I took the wormery apart and then found a place in one of the layers of the wormery. So basically there's different tiers to the wormery, and what you do is put all your compost stuff in that layer, put another layer on top and keep going, and the worms will slowly work their way up towards where the new stuff is. Then as they make that into some beautiful compost, you just take that out and just continue that process. I spread them out and oh my god, they got wild as worms can probably get. But they were like loving it. They were like, we're free! I put a little layer of peat-free compost over the top of them just to like get them started, and then placed the lid back on top. I then put the wormery back down on the floor, and at the bottom of the wormery they have a tap. Now this is liquid gold that comes out of here, because you can imagine there's quite a lot of wet stuff like worm juice that builds at the bottom, and I let the tap rip because it hasn't been touched in ages. There's probably loads of rainwater. It's really soggy in there. I just opened up the tap. But once that starts to dry up a little bit inside that wormery, I'll put the tap back off, and then that will slowly build, and all that worm juice is great to go over our little seedlings. It really helps them grow, but that is going to take a little bit of time. Now, if you're doing this in summer, you don't want your soil to be too dry, because then your worms will just sort of die. And I believe that's what happened to some of my old ones. You want that soil to be damp, but not too soggy and not too dry, because your worms need that moisture to continue work. And now what I'm going to do is leave those worms to just settle in to their new environment, and then I'm going to put some beautiful scraps of food in that layer and then slowly get that composting happening. Now you might be asking, what can you put into your wormery as well? You can put loads of food scraps like fruits, vegetables, coffee ground, tea bags, eggshells, shredded paper. You need to have a good mix of organic and dry stuff. Really mix it up for them. What you don't want to put in is things like citrus fruits, onions, garlic, meat, dairy products, pasta and cereal, and shiny coated paper, because the worms really don't like that sort of stuff, and we want the worms to, you know, enjoy their new surroundings. For now, we'll leave them worms to do their thing, but I've got a feeling we're going to see them pop back on this channel in the not too distant future. I'll leave a link in the description of where I got my worms from, not the £16,000 ones, and let me know in the comments if you've got a wormery or you're thinking about composting with worms this year. I'd love to hear from you. This whole YouTube thing is amazing, but I really want to get involved in the community, really get talking, so drop me a comment, say hello, let me know you're watching, and then maybe one day we'll buy the £16,000 worms. Probably.